Thank you for tuning in to Shifting Paradigms. We appreciate your support and feedback. For questions and comments, please contact us at shiftingparadigmsmedia@gmail.com. For updates on future content, you can find us on our Shifting Paradigms Media Facebook page. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe following the program. But for now, enjoy the show.
A date which will live in infamy.
And we are, as a people, opposed to secret societies.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. One small step for man, one giant leap for all mankind.
And welcome back to Shifting Paradigms. This is Chris Baxter along with my co-host Patrick Thomas. We are obviously excited that we've been able to keep this thing going. We're going to be having 2 shows this month instead of the normal one. Our guest tonight is actually Linda Godfrey. Now, she's one of America's most foremost authorities on modern-day monsters. She's an author of more than a dozen books on werewolves, hauntings, and the paranormal, including Real Wolfmen, True Encounters in North America, American Monsters, A History of Monster Lore, Legends and Sightings in America, and Weird Michigan. Now, she has also appeared on many national TV shows such as Monster Quest, a personal favorite of mine, Inside Edition, and Hannity, and has been a guest on radio shows such as Coast to Coast AM. Welcome to Shifting Paradigms, Linda. How are you tonight?
I'm great. Thanks for letting me be here with you.
And we certainly appreciate it. Now, obviously, you're one of the foremost authorities when it comes to strange happenings here in North America and beyond. And we want to get into your new book, which I certainly love. It's Monsters Among Us, and it has to do with kind of a wide-ranging topics across the country and then certain cases within them all. But we kind of want to get into like the backstory of you first and how you first got into this. Now, you started out as a journalist, correct?
Right. And I was only a journalist because I wanted to do editorial cartoons for the newspaper. And that was my big thing. And I wanted to be, with the National Syndicate, and you really need to have published examples before they look at you. So I just called the paper and said I would do these for free. And then after a while, they started paying me $8 whole a cartoon, and this was not during the Depression. So, I mean, it was a while ago. Well, not that long. But
you
then
didn't spend it all at once, did you?
No, I had to save for a long time to buy.
I believe it.
Yeah. But it wasn't that long before I called in one day to talk to the editor, and he said, "Hey, our main reporter just quit. Would you like to be a reporter?" And which was kind of flabbergasting, because my degree is art education, and I actually have also taught art in public schools here and there over the years.
I don't think that's
I
as
was
well known
surprised,
as
but
many
I thought,
people should know.
oh well, that's the truth. Yeah, I did not really become a journalist until I was hired for that newspaper, and then it was sort of on the job training. But I had always written, I had always done other things, so it wasn't like I was totally unprepared. And actually, you can't get a better sort of training for public writing than writing cartoons and comics, because you have to be so concise and yet fill each word with meaning in order to fit them in the little balloons.
Right.
On the pages, and so that really actually was a good prerequisite for whether I realized it or not. But so I said, well, sure, how hard could it be? And I thought it sounded like fun. And then, wouldn't you know, people around Bray Road started telling our animal control officer and others that they were seeing something that looked like a werewolf out on this country road outside of Elkhorn, my town where I lived at the time, and did for 30-some years.
Now, had you heard about it before? Had you ever heard about the Beast of Bray Road before you were to this point? Like, were there legends at that time before you got into investigating it? Not to interrupt.
Not that I knew of. No, that's okay. Not that I knew of. It was something that had sort of been discovered among different people out there by accident. That one found out another one had seen it, and another one found out this and that, and a woman who was a bus driver actually tipped me off about it, a school bus driver, because a high school student talking about it, and her daughter had seen the same thing, and so that's how I came to know about it, and I started asking around to some of the people that I knew, and discovered that it was a rumor. There were people who hadn't seen it but who had heard about it that was presently going around in that town, and we're talking about 91, late fall of 91, and the story that I finally wrote about it broke on New Year's Eve weekend, so that would have been 91 going into 92. Might as well say 92. And I remember the editor and I talking about it and saying, well, it's kind of a fun story. It was new because our animal control officer, I discovered, had a manila file folder in his office marked werewolf. I was working with him on another story and just asked him if he had heard about it. And he said, well, sure, and he pulled out this file folder. And that was really surprising because when you've got a county official with a file in his office marked werewolf that he's seriously filling up with entries from people who were calling him and saying, hey, I saw this thing. I don't know what it was, but if there was such a thing as a werewolf, this would be it. And they were all describing something between 5.5 to 6 feet tall, with a head like a German Shepherd or a wolf, walking on its toe pads like a dog does, not flat-footed like a human or a Bigfoot.
Yeah,
covered with
a lot. German Shepherd is a description.
Yes,
here
that's very, very exactly. That's a very, very common comparison that people make. Exactly, covered with fur and walking on its hind legs, like I said, and sort of staring insolently at people. That was the other weird thing, And then just when people would be starting to feel really scared of it or terrorized, it would somehow just turn and run away into the cornfield or the tree line or whatever was there for cover. So it was also behaving pretty consistently. Sometimes it would chase after cars a little bit, scratched a couple of trunks of cars that I saw. And I saw these, and somewhere I have photos of both of the cars that were claiming to be scratched at that time. But you can't use them for proof. I mean, they could have been made by a claw, but, it's not like they leave DNA or anything that you can test. So, but anyway, once it got published in our little newspaper, it got picked up by AP, and it went worldwide in a matter of, I'd say, weeks. It was just astonishing. And we had no clue that would happen, and I was getting calls from all over the country and everywhere, and saying, we have this thing too, or wanting to learn more about what it was. And we thought that would go away. And the town was just like sort of in riot mode because there were busloads of people coming up from Illinois. The bars were offering silver bullet specials. The bakery had werewolf cookies. It was, it was insane.
Hopefully
they were delicious. It's a wonderful bakery. Yep. Lakeland Bakery. I have pictures of them somewhere. I should send them to you. You guys could put them up on your page.
Oh, we'd love it.
But no, they were very good. They had werewolves wearing little blue jeans and things. So, it was, and I was glad to see the town having some fun and some of the merchants being able to benefit, in a way.
Right.
And the thing was, it never stopped after that. And I worked for that newspaper for 10 years, and during that 10 years, I continued to get not only media requests from all over, because for a really long time, no one else was really paying any attention to the fact, or if they did, they just assumed it must be a Bigfoot or something. So I was, for a long time, pretty much the go-to person for anything that resembled a modern-day or contemporary sighting of of a werewolf. Well, even though I did not think that they were werewolves at the time, I still don't think they're your good old Hollywood medieval European type of traditional werewolf by any means.
Right. No.
But
That makes no logical
no,
sense.
no. But especially that's why I coined the term the Beast of Bray Road, because that leaves it wide open. You know, a beast could be any sort of animal, really.
Right. And then to be
Yeah,
honest,
so-
I've never really liked the term dogman. To me, it's a little. I don't want to insult anybody who's coined it, but I just think that the beast sounds so much better because we don't know what it is. It doesn't follow any evolutionary track. But it's seen, from state to state to state throughout the Midwest and beyond.
And Canada.
And Canada, exactly. Yeah, and there's plenty of Native American legends about it. In fact, here in Wisconsin, the beast, I forget what the actual name is, but it translates to like the old wise man of the woods, where Native Americans would claim to see like a wolf-like being, like in the woods at times, like at night. And I just think that I like the beast a lot more. So I'm glad that you coined it. It'll always be the beast to me, Linda.
Right.
Oh, thank you. Well, the other thing is, I've always kind of used wolfman and dogman interchangeably. In Michigan, they have the dogman.
Right.
And it seems to be the exact same creature. And really, both of them are more wolf-like than dog-like in total appearance in most cases, not everyone, but in most cases. So we don't really know if it is a wolf or a dog hybrid, which seems as likely as anything else to me.
So when you were first approached with this story, Linda, were you, obviously I think any normal person would be kind of skeptical to think it's like a hoax or something like that.
Oh, I laughed. I laughed.
Right.
I thought it was ridiculous.
Yeah, just because everybody hears about Bigfoot and all that, and I think Dogman and Wolfman, they kind of get more swept under the rug because growing up, as children, there's vampires and werewolves, and the thought of it in real life, it's kind of a little more hard to grasp compared to like Bigfoot or UFOs, something like that.
Yeah, it's more unusual for sure, and there still are, I think, far fewer sightings of upright unknown canines, as I really prefer to call them. But my book editors don't think that's too sexy of a title, so it doesn't get used off. But I really think there are lots more Bigfoot and UFO sightings than there are sightings of these things. I think they are more rare, although they're more widespread than people think. There's still not as many as there are Bigfoot or UFOs.
Well, and I think the thing too with that is, there could be more sightings that we don't know about, but they might report them as a Bigfoot sighting because maybe they just catch a glimpse of something and just kind of assume, it must be a Bigfoot or something like that.
Or something else. I've had people say, well, I saw a satyr in the woods, and I'll show them. I do this sketch early on of what I call the indigenous dogman, which kind of shows what most people have generally described to me over the years. It's been copied and pasted all over the internet. It's on all kinds of sites that don't give me credit, and when I call the site owners, they'll say, well, yeah, that's the one everybody says it looks like, so yeah, I want to use it. Well, that's fine, but you've probably seen it and not even realized. But this thing, when I show it to them, they'll go, oh, that's what it was. That's it. Yeah, it wasn't. They'll say, I didn't know what else to think of it, and something brown and upright, and it wasn't big enough or bulky enough to be a bear. I just assumed it had to be something like Pan, or those old Roman satyrs that you see illustrations of. But when they see the actual photo of how the wolf or the dog looks standing up with it and how its leg structure works into that, then they're convinced.
Now, obviously, the dogman is a very interesting subject in cryptozoology, because do you think it's a biological animal, or do you think we're dealing with something that maybe doesn't need a breeding population, or is something more along the lines of like the UFO phenomena, that it's something maybe beyond our understanding right now? And the reason I ask that is because you said you got into this, laughingly, and then I'm assuming, as you started to believe that there might be something there, your first response would be, logically, that this is some kind of animal. But throughout the years, we've seen more and more evidence that things overlap in certain areas that show that more is going on than meets the eye. So I guess kind of walk me through the process of researching the beast and how exactly you've come to the opinion of where you are now.
Yeah, and my latest book, the Monsters Among Us book that we're talking about tonight, was really all about that process of discovering that while probably 85-90% of sightings that get reported to me personally seem to be just a strange-looking creature doing nothing that's really overtly supernatural. There are quite a few sightings that involve things like, seeming invisibility, people thinking they had some sort of semi-telepathic message from them, weird glows, eye shine that's red instead of the normal canine that almost everybody else says. And then there are different varieties. I can kind of separate them into categories. And that was really something that has just evolved in me over the years, because I did think it had to be some kind of natural animal that maybe there was a successful mutation and adaptation of longer paws, because that's the one difference people often do report, is that they'll notice the paws seem longer than a normal dog's paws, and the
right, yeah,
digits
those are the ones
are
that I
almost
think that are
like
most
fingers.
interesting. Yeah, where they're
you
longer.
hear that a lot.
Well, you need a longer and larger paw to, obviously support the weight and balance of the object and creature that you're walking with.
Right, exactly. It makes the whole thing make a lot more sense, because all this time, another thing that I've done is consult naturalists and wolf experts, and I know I talked to Adrian Weideman, who was Wisconsin DNR's wolf specialist for many years, and to Rolf Peterson, who has the Michigan Wolf and Moose Island study that's been going on for years, because they've collared and followed wolves, and my question is always, have you ever come across circumstances where it seems like there are pockets or areas where wolves are naturally walking around and running on their hind legs? And they all, without exception, say no, absolutely not. We never see that in the wild. Now, any mammal can walk on its hind legs, but when it occurs in the wild, it's almost always because of an injured limb or paw.
Right.
And the animals are not very successful at hunting, and they either make nuisances of themselves going to garbage cans and get shot, or just kind of starve to death, sadly. But there's no natural. If this were some sort of widely spreading mutation, then you would think there would be little groups of them that you could observe and that were acting this way because it was beneficial, and so they would do it a lot. But I don't find that at all. And yet, then there are all these other sort of permutations. Now, I have said right from the very beginning, because I've also always tried to interview people that I know who are of the First Nations, who were first observers of these things and who do have a very long tradition of them. And I know that, for instance, I interviewed a person who is not just an elder of the Ho-Chunk, but also an anthropologist, and elders at different places. And the one sort of paradigm that they all tell me in common, and I know that there are other ideas around in the United States, because not all Native Americans are monolithic in their beliefs, but most of them will say, we believe that this creature and the Bigfoot are originally from the spirit world, and they still know how to get back and forth. And when they're here, they are solid flesh and blood. They can bleed, they need to eat, they defecate, they do all the things, they breed, you see babies. But when they need to go back, they know where the door to the spirit world is, or we might say the opening, the portal to the other world or multiverse or dimension, to put it in more modern terms. But this mode of thinking really does explain the totality of the sightings the best, because it can account for the fact that you can see them standing there right in front of you and drooling, and they're maybe they're roaring, they're picking berries, they're doing earth-centered things, and then you get some sort of really unnatural, strange behavior, or it just seems to disappear. That does happen sometimes. I've personally seen tracks that landed, looked like they landed off a helicopter in the middle of a field and then walked on hind legs into a woods. How do you explain that sort of thing? And these were big five-toed canine prints. So it just takes care of the whole panorama of behavior. And again, they've been around a lot longer than we have, and their traditions about
absolutely.
this are clear. They're very clear. Yeah.
You see, and I kind of wanted to go back because this kind of relates to you talking about the pan, and for the listeners out there who don't know what a pan creature is, kind of like a goat man that was around during the Roman time. They spotted them, and you had there's a story in your book which is the basis of tonight's show, Monsters Among Us, and the story that I kind of came to mind was the church incident, and and the drawing that was provided with that shows your typical wolf or wolf man or whatever you want to call it, your beast, but it had feet that were similar to a pan, almost like hoofs.
They were hoofed, definitely, right. Yeah, and that is it is unusual. It's the first time I've received that description. Although there have been goat man sightings where people say no, it was like a goat head, and it had horns, and it's very different. And some of the goat man sightings are in Wisconsin, so maybe that is something separate. But yeah, the church lady thing was different in so many ways. That was kind of an astounding
I
report.
found that story just really fascinating. I was just hoping you could kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, this happened, I can't remember the exact number of years ago, but it was maybe 10 or 12 years ago, something like that.
I think it was 92 you had in the book.
Oh, 92? Oh, that's longer than I thought. But yeah, that's a while ago. But this happened to a couple. I met the husband and the wife, and I personally interviewed them in person 3 times, and we had lots of correspondence, and I checked out everything. I'm trying to prepare you for the fact that this is really, or your listeners, for the fact that this is really an unusual circumstances, and I was making sure to investigate it in every way that I had possible. And they even both signed affidavits stating that what they were telling me was true and factual to the best of their knowledge. Well, they were members of a small, kind of Baptist-style conservative church in northern Illinois. The church is physically no longer there, so it's not something you can go and look for, but I did confirm that it was there at one time. And they had an arrangement of pews where the front pews were in kind of a tight U formation, and then they sort of spread out, in rows from that. And this family was sitting in the front row, and so there was another woman sitting almost directly across from them at fairly close range. And during the service, they said she kept kind of like making twitchy movements. They kept, kind of looking at her every once in a while. And they had their son and their daughter. I think their daughter was a teenager, and the son was like junior high age at the same time. And they said she had not been going there very long. They didn't really know her. She was very nondescript in appearance. Nothing stood out to really dressed very plainly. So it wasn't like it was anything in her appearance. But at the end of the sermon, the minister would always take his Bible and then walk down to the main floor from the altar to join his wife for the music portion, which the music director would take over. And he just reached that point when she suddenly, this woman, jumped up off of the pew, stood up, kind of twitched her neck, let out this huge kind of screaming, roaring sound, and right before their eyes changed from a fully dressed woman into a fur-covered, werewolf-looking creature. It looked like an upright wolf, except these people were close enough that they could clearly see, instead of paws, it did have hooves. So, of course, anyone acquainted with Judeo-Christian biblical imagery would imagined that would be a representation of them to a demon or Satan or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
With the hooves. But
Right.
This wasn't, they said it wasn't a case where, it was like Jack Nicholson with his suddenly the eyeballs bulge and the whiskers pop out in the neck tendons, tighten up and everything was crackling and, where it takes several minutes. This was just an instantaneous transformation, almost as if this wolf appeared suddenly around the woman. And she was only in that state for probably not very many seconds, because the pastor immediately rebuked her, held his Bible out toward her and rebuked her, and she sort of kind of seemed to shrink back a little bit. And then there were ushers or elders up in the front of the church that it took, I think, 5 of them to take her down onto the pew, and the minister is praying over it all the time. And once they did that, instantly it reverted back to this woman. And, everything had stopped. I mean, the service had stopped. Not everybody could see what was going on because she wasn't standing for that long. And when she transformed back, this family was really they were really the only ones that had this really great view besides the elders that were up there. So the next thing that happens is everybody sees this woman being led off towards, somewhere in the church by these elders, and thinking, what happened, and it was kind of interesting because the family said there was sort of like this hush of silence that continued. People they kind of said, did you see that? Did you see that? And then nobody talked about it anymore.
Well,
and the film, pardon?
No,
I was just going to say the video of the sermon that was always made somehow disappeared. So that wasn't around for evidence anymore. When the husband went to go look for it, he wanted to see if it showed up, and they said it was not there anymore. So nobody knew.
Well, obviously, there's always been some kind of secrecy when it comes to these kinds of events happening on our planet. But what I wanted to touch on was the fact that it does seem that in certain areas, whether there be churches or cemeteries or places of worship or burial mounds or effigies, there seems to be a higher frequency of strange events happening. I mean, you can go back to the earliest recordings of the Loch Ness Monster actually happens with a saint, at the side of the loch, basically speaking to the creature, and that's like the earliest recordings we have of it. And, hearing that story about the transformation in church, it sounds too crazy to be true, but with that many eyewitnesses, and with all the things we know now that have happened all over the planet, you have to wonder how long this stuff has been going on.
See, and
right.
What I find interesting about that story too is you had mentioned in the book that after she had turned back into a woman, there was a strong sulfur smell. And a lot of times, the smell of sulfur is kind of associated with like some kind of, dark being or demonic being. And
right, quite often.
And see, what I really find interesting is if you look all the way back to like the Egyptians, they have these hieroglyphs of Anubis, who is the king of the underworld. He's the basically their version of Satan. And sulfur, naturally comes from underground, and it almost seems like there's some kind of connection between, this underworld type scenario and the sulfur smell, because there's multiple recordings of people, having some kind of strange experience and smelling sulfur.
Yeah, and I have other examples of that in the book too. And the Anubis thing is often brought up. I don't know that it fits quite as well in this case as many other ones, where it's almost always the appearance of unknown upright canines that appear in people's homes, in their bedrooms. In fact, I just got a new report from somebody a few days ago about this occurring, and they are the ones who especially say it looked like that Egyptian Anubis, because it was jet black with short, shiny fur, not the long, shaggy stuff, very tall, prominent ears on top of the head. And I've received this description and the comparison to Anubis just, for almost all the years I've been doing this. So, but that seems to be something different. It doesn't sound very much at all like the one people saw on Bray Road, or that others normally see, running around in the countryside or wherever, because it's taller, more muscular. It's this jet black. It has more of a humanoid form, where it has actual shoulders rather than just kind of more muscular forelimbs.
Yeah,
which
more
is,
of a brute-like animal shape. Now,
yeah.
In your research, do you think that there's a difference in environment and where these things manifest? I guess what I should be asking is, do you think that these creatures are the same, but depending where they manifest or have the energy to take a physical form in our realm, do you think that how they appear is based upon where they manifest, or do you think that we're dealing with separate entities?
I kind of think we're dealing with separate entities because, these home invaders with the red eyes, which is not a normal canine, and the humanoid-style bodies, more like hands, are really more like hands than paws. They're just too different from the great bulk of the sightings. And appearing in people's homes and bedrooms, we know that they are then some type of, I hate to say supernatural. I like to say phenomena not understood by our science, perhaps. But they're more like the phantom black hounds of Great Britain than they are these wolf-dog hybrid things that run on their hind legs around outside most of the time.
Right, or like the black cats of like Scotland, or...
Yeah, they just seem very, very different. Kind of, I always like to compare it to humans. I mean, we know we are flesh and blood humans, and yet there's such a thing as the human double, an astral double that can appear to another person or can be on the other side of the world. There are images of dead people that appear to living people, and I know quite a few who've had this happen to them. There are things that look like shadows of people, and I have the same thing. I've got a chapter on shadow wolves. It can also happen, with animals.
I was a big fan of that.
Oh, thanks. And so it seems like we've got, if there's a variety of these things in human beings, they can also be in something like a wolf. It's almost like something is coming and mimicking the original creation in various ways.
And well, I believe there was a lot of Native American tribes have something that they kind of refer to as almost like a cosmic joker, which...
The trickster.
Right, exactly, there you go. That would kind of... It never actually, most of the time, did not cause like physical pain, but they would instill fear or feed off of raw emotions. And
that's how it seems, almost like emotional vampires. Mm-hmm.
See, and that kind of ties into a story that actually involved our prior guest, Nick Redfern. And in your book, you talked about him waking up in a state of sleep paralysis, and he saw, a dog man or whatever you want to call it, standing in his hallway. And with sleep paralysis, your mind is awake, but your body's still asleep. He couldn't move, and this creature started approaching him, and he was fighting to get his body awake. And when it finally reached his bedroom, is when he finally was able to awaken. And the creature then disappeared. And it was almost like, it was feeding off his emotions. It was getting closer and closer. And he's, obviously, terrified. And as soon as he was able to regain control, it's almost like it lost its power.
Right, yeah. And that's, again, a pretty common phenomenon, and something that where the creature seems very different in those cases, even from the regular bedroom visitors. There are a lot of them that just come and seem like they're tourists. They don't really elicit fear. Sometimes people sort of just sit back and admire them. They look around, and then they leave. It's just so very odd, and not how we usually think of something we might term a quote-unquote monster behaving.
Well, and I think there's definitely like it's tough because there's so many discrepancies, and it could be that you've got one phenomena that, just like humans, has many different, emotions and personalities, and we don't know exactly how
That's
they
true too.
react and can take form. So,
Exactly.
One person's peaceful ghost could be another person's poltergeist. It's no different than having a good or bad roommate. But then at the same time, but at the same time, there's so many other things that seem to be going on, especially with these strange cryptids. Now, you did quite a bit of work here in Wisconsin on a farm down near you. And we won't use the owner's name out of respect for him. But to kind of talk us through that, because you're kind of one of the few authors and researchers that isn't afraid to put their foot in the mud, if you know what I mean, to actually go out and investigate. There's a lot of Johnny and Jenny pencil pushers when it comes to research. When did you first decide that you wanted to get into the field when it came to your research? And how much of that has become a part of your life today?
Well, that really began at the very beginning when this thing was supposed to be out on Bray Road. There was a tabloid magazine that wanted me and a photographer to sit out on Bray Road, and I'm like, okay. I went and bought a supermarket chicken, just a raw chicken, and we set out. I placed it in the ditch. I've got all these pictures of me. I think there's a photograph in The Beast of Bray Road, the first book on the topic, placing this chicken in the ditch, and we made it most of the night. There was absolutely nothing that we saw that happened. Of course, there's a car with a photographer with his camera up, the whole time. That's never when anything happens. But I thought, well, that was pretty cool. And I did a lot. They kind of jokingly called me the adventure reporter because, I did skydiving and parasailing and all that kind of thing to report for the paper. So I always liked the action part of it, and it's just sort of been natural ever since. When I can get to something, I'm not supported by a corporation or something that flies me all over, that I can get to every place I'd like to. But when they're within range, and this one certainly was, I do like to be very hands-on, if at all possible.
Well, and that's great, Linda. But what exactly was your most, I guess, thrilling or the exciting moment in the field? Was there ever a time where you went from, obviously you went from skeptic to enthusiast, but when did you become a believer? And, obviously this can go outside the realms of cryptozoology because you've spent plenty of time investigating hauntings, ufology, and in many of the different realms of the paranormal, supernatural, or outside the realm of science, as you might say. But what was the best time that you've had in the field where there was kind of that moment?
Well, I have to say, it really, despite having the experience of a basketball-sized orb coming across a field to where I was sitting with the field owner and a colleague, we were all sitting in a car and watching this thing float across this field to us, stop about 30 feet in the air, maybe 30 feet from the car, and just kind of poised, looking at us, and we're all like, what? And then my colleague Sanjay Singhal, who I'd invited along for, it was my idea to do a field stakeout that night. And
he's a great guy.
He is, very much so. He had a large flashlight, and he just automatically almost trained it up in the air at this thing, and it paused for a second. That was the weirdest thing. If it was just a big light blotting out another light, it should have just been gone. But this paused and then sort of imploded. It was and then we were all just yelling because it was crazy. It should not have been possible for something to do what that thing did. So there was that, and then and that's in the Monsters Among Us. And then I described I think I described this in the American Monsters book, the one just before that, where I was in the Kettle Moraine by myself with no camera, just walking. And the short version is I witnessed a 35-foot long, 7 to 8 inch diameter living oak limb twisted off a tree from about 40 feet up a big old oak tree, twisted off, and then in another cracking motion, torn away from the tree and thrown down into a kettle, the bottom of a kettle, very close to me. I mean, right in front of me, and I couldn't see it because the foliage was so thick. But there was nothing it could have been but a Bigfoot. I totally ruled everything else out. And there's a full account in American Monsters, and also if you go to my blog, lindagodfrey.com, and you can just put Bigfoot Branch in the search box, and you can see pictures, supporting photos, and the whole thing is in there that you can read.
Well, and here we are in Wisconsin. A lot of people think that we're up in the north, so we've got like black bears and grizzly bears and everything else in between. But actually, on this side of the Mississippi, where we are in this area, the largest carnivore we have is the black bear, and it's only really located in the northern parts. Now, we have the occasional puma, but here in the state, you'll see uprooted trees turned upside down, things that are snapped off and twisted. And like you said, that limb falling right next to you, it's. And I'm assuming when you were out in the kettles, like any sane person, it was probably decent weather. I'm assuming you weren't out there in 60-degree or 60-mile-per-hour winds and like a thunderstorm. No. And we hadn't had any kind of recent storms. It was, summer. It was a very still summer evening, nice, warm. That's why I just gotten up and gone to take a walk by myself. And so there was nothing in the weather to account for it. I could see when it splintered as it was being twisted and ground around. It was like something had a hold of this branch and was twisting it. There was absolutely no reason for a branch to naturally twist itself off a tree like that. And I could see that it was fresh new wood. And because, again, I was not very far away from it. And did I mention that I had started this whole process by just on a lark deciding to whop a tree with a big stick, and actually got a knockback from very close. And I was persisting because I knew it had to be something with an opposable thumb that could hold a branch and hit a tree with it. And that can only be human or some type of other large primate. Or a giant raccoon. But
yes, a massive raccoon.
but we won't go there.
I wouldn't want to see that.
No, I'm waiting for Raccoon Man.
I can't imagine.
That's my cryptid. But
that was a Japanese movie.
Oh well, I'm in.
Massive raccoon, yeah.
Well, big fan of kaiju, but obviously as we, we're talking about cryptids, kind of in a paradigm sense that a lot of people aren't used to. Now, and we're kind of get into the realms of these things, aren't even from this universe or this dimension. Have you had struggles talking to people? At first, as a journalist, it probably was easy because you were approaching it from a certain point of view. But now, knowing what you know and seeing the information and the knowledge, is it tough for you to, open up to somebody talking about them in a sense that some people would think is absurd, but if you look at quantum physics and the way that science is going, that this is possibly more likely than we ever thought.
Yeah, I do cover that in the book too. The thing is, with quantum physics and what our top leading edge, smartest people on the earth, scientists, are now predicting from the mathematical formulas that have already proven true in every other way, it's almost certain that there is some sort of other realm or reality or a universe or dimension. I think they're still not sure exactly how to define it or what to call it. But, some of the most recent ones have even shown that there could be some sort of interaction between Earth and one of these. They've shown it on a micro scale and possibly, working toward a macro scale. So this is a possibility, but the thing is, I'm always very careful to caution people, is that we still don't even know the model of what other type of world this would be, much less what can go in and out of it on Earth if they do it all, whether a human could go in there, whether the things that come out of these things have different properties, different physical properties than us. Maybe they've got a slightly different bodily vibration or atomic vibration or electromagnetic field, because every human or every living thing has an electromagnetic field.
Right.
We don't know all these things. And I felt, alluding to your earlier part of the question, for a long time I really didn't talk much about my sightings, but and the Bigfoot sightings didn't really start for me until about 5 years ago, and I've been at this for 25 years. And I just finally, and I've had more than I've talked about, but the next book that comes out will talk more in detail about. I have seen them now, since that branch incident kind of started it, and since then I have seen them physically, and I will be talking about that. But the thing that made me do that is I couldn't see just sitting here and never risking being, challenged about it when so many people are bravely coming to me and reporting their incidents, and then I'm sitting there knowing that I've seen the same thing and then not write about it. It just seemed, kind of morally not defensible for me to keep that secret anymore. So what I say is, this is what I saw. I witnessed such and such characteristic. It conforms with all the ideas and things written and observed about what we call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I still don't know what they are. I still don't know for sure what the creature was, but there's no other organism I know of that it matches other than what the cryptozoology world has sort of tentatively agreed is present in any depiction or actions of a Bigfoot.
No,
it looked like a Bigfoot.
No,
absolutely.
It did. But I think one thing that has to be tough, though, is after researching and you being trained in the art of observation and other people that have actually seen these things and has researched them, is over the years getting so many people that as soon as they see something that looks a little weird, they automatically jump onto it has to be Bigfoot or it has to be that. And that makes research so much harder. With UFOs, we have drones now. And, with cryptozoology, we understand more and more with, on science now. For example, and I am a believer in the beast or the dog man or whatever you want to call it. But I'm sorry, a bear with mange, looks a lot like an upright canine. And to go into that, there's plenty of other instances of where something can... It's almost like a joker card thrown into your research because there actually are things, and there's many others.
Right.
Oh, right, and that brings up another thing that you had mentioned in your book, and I'm actually really glad you did, because not a lot of people know about this. It's a condition that occurs not very often with people, but it's you had mentioned it's called hypertrichosis.
Right.
And you hear the people I saw a wolf man in the middle of the city wearing a hoodie. Well, hypertrichosis is, for people that don't know, it's a condition that some people get where they grow hair on their entire body. And if you look back at like the old Wolfman movie, where they
Lon Chaney,
right? Yeah, they didn't have the costumes that we have nowadays, to where you could actually make it look like a dog head. So they kind of just put a bunch of fur on him and gave him some fake teeth. But the thing with hypertrichosis is, if you haven't seen a person with hypertrichosis, you're definitely going to question what you just saw.
Right.
There
are hoaxes, to be sure. The only thing with hypertrichosis is you won't see that long muzzle and the fangs that most people report. You won't see it walking on its toe pads. This is a human in every other way. It's just that they've got this dense layer of fur. Usually they have to get surgery because there's so much in their ears and around their eyes that they can barely hear or see. And it is quite rare. There's this big family in Mexico. Some of them were associated with circus.
The X-Files. Actually, two of them were on the X-Files. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Exactly. And but they are quite rare, and it's more common that hoaxes will be pulled with somebody in kind of a made up suit. Those do happen, and I think you have to admit that they happen and deal with it. And still, for instance, I knew of at least 3 or 4 different ones on Bray Road alone, where local people had tried, hoaxing. But the thing was, when I went back to the witness database, none of their activities matched up with the sightings. And I found the sightings right on Bray Road are near, very, very close to it. having going back to like 1981, before anybody was doing any sort of hoaxing. And so, and it was a full body sighting, by a man who was a trained artist and was able to, Marv Kirshnick. So there are hoaxes everywhere, but you cannot explain, the huge bulk of sightings by hoaxes. You have people who are also claiming to have seen it, kind of on the other side of it, and not being truthful. And those are something that I'm always trying to kind of weed out of the mix.
Right, and that's what I was kind of going to ask you is how do you go about approaching something that you think is a hoax? You don't want to, just shoot down the idea because somebody said one thing that kind of puts you off. But how do you approach something where you think it's a hoax?
Well, usually I'll just kind of try and question them more. I might ask them to sign an affidavit. It's sort of a delicate thing. There have been times when I've come right out and said, "Well, are you telling me the truth, or are you, putting me on with this?" And I've had people look me in the eye and then say, "No, this is the truth." But there's always something a little bit evasive about it, and then I found out later that no, it was something that they made up for some reason. But that's really so rare compared to the great vast bulk of sightings. Again, there aren't many people who will really rise to that level of deception.
Right.
And it's usually males of a certain age, on the younger end of it, and
like me and
maybe
Chris.
feeling
Like me and Chris. Or me and Pat.
yeah, there we go.
But no, I think that's absolutely right. Actually, you find a lot of hoaxers. A lot of them are involved in the entertainment or the film industry, which is really bad because me and Pat are interested in getting in film and all of that. But no, I find hoaxers to be like the most despicable people because
it really muddies the water.
Well, not only that, but we're possibly dealing with what should be endangered animals if they do exist, right?
Yeah.
And so if you are interfering with that just for personal gain for a couple, social media likes or whatever, you're possibly affecting the existence of an organism because no one's taking it seriously. I mean, we live in a state right now here in Wisconsin that doesn't accept pumas or mountain lions or cougars, and yes, listeners, they're all the same animal, living east of the Mississippi. Obviously with your research and, my own, we know that's obviously not true. We see them in...
Oh, there are tons of them.
I mean, they're all over the country.
They are. My husband was stalked by one in our own backyard just a couple of years ago. So he had to walk backwards, yelling and waving his arms backwards across our whole lawn up to our deck before it turned back into the woods. We lived right on a kettle. And we found the footprints, and then he saw it the next day. And we had two different neighbors on different ends of the street that also saw and identified it. And this is maybe 5 miles from a place where DNR was confirmed to be the same as the cat that was shot near downtown Chicago and one of the nearby suburbs of Chicago.
Now, what did that end up being ruled? Now, was that from... Did they claim that was loose from a zoo, or did they claim that was actually a wild puma?
It was wild. They said that its DNA was consistent with pumas in the Black Hills region. That they would come through Minnesota and then down through Wisconsin, and then evidently they were following some trail around the Great Lakes. Maybe it end up, in New York or Maine or some way. But usually if one animal finds a corridor like that, there are others. And I've been in the cattle moraine and seen hundreds of very fresh cougar prints in the snow. Just a year or so ago, I've got
Well, I found them up at our place in Upper Michigan. I mean, and
tons up there.
So if we can find evidence of an animal that has, a 300 square mile radius, that we know exists in the puma, but our government and our officials take no action on it, it's hard to imagine that they would take any action upon something that we supposedly have no, evidence whatsoever even being a real thing.
Well, that's just like wolves in Wisconsin too. They said for years that the wolves, there was no wolves in Wisconsin. Well, then it was okay. There's wolves in the northern part, and then all of a sudden a farmer shot one down by Madison. So I mean, to think that a certain creature is just limited by a certain area that they have to stay there. That's their area.
Yeah, it's as if they had invisible, doggy collars and electric fences or something.
Right.
Right. Well, and they always pull out their map so they know exactly where they are. I mean, they don't want to cross.
Exactly.
I can't imagine the dog man not going into Illinois without paying, a toll. They seem very respectful to me.
So going.
And I'm sorry.
Oh, kind of going off of that, the Wolfman sightings, they seem to be more in the the northern part of the country. But where is the farthest area that you've had a story occur?
Well, just among ones that I've personally collected, I've had a few from Europe, Germany and Italy, France, and then also from kind of the far reaches of Canada, far northern Canada, and all the way down into South America.
Really? Wow.
So it's widespread.
Now, does it seem to you that it's kind of odd that throughout cultures across the world, we have these spirits and beings with different personalities that seem to be humanoid, with the animals of that region, their heads being displayed upon these beings. For example, we look at Egyptian culture, and obviously Sobek was the crocodile god, and we know Anubis, the god of the underworld, etc. And then here in North America, there are stories of the goat man and tulpa beings, including, as we have just mentioned, the beast and dog man. But then, there are also the reports of beings with like the heads of elks, and
flying humanoid.
Right, absolutely, and you just go go across the world. I can keep going, and I can keep going. Do you think that it's connected? That they're all connected in some way? And in your professional opinion, why do you think it is that these things seem to have a certain form region to region? Is it almost they're feeding off of the thoughts of the people who live there that give them that form? Or are they feeding off of the wildlife that is in that area?
It could be either way. I would say that usually you've got a were animal that resembles the top several predators in any region. For instance, where there isn't a wolf, you might see a jaguar as the were creature, or a were leopard, or a were tiger, that sort of thing. So I think that the animals that are around the region that people would be somewhat familiar with are usually the ones portrayed, so that must have something to do with it. But it's really hard to say. It gets into this whole other realm where you're looking at shamanism and use of hallucinogenic types of substances, certain mushrooms and plants and things like that. People who've used ayahuasca will often see figures like this, where there's a human figure and the head of an animal, or certain powerful animals that are in that region. So that's a whole other topic. I mean, you could go on speculate. And with me, it's so beyond me. I feel like I'm just barely able to speculate as far as those things go.
Well, clearly, if these things are going on with UFOs and these strange cryptids and lights and mists and not trying to be cheesy, but all these monsters among us, that there must be multiple realities or dimensions or worlds going on at the same time, because we're certainly not all. Your dog agrees. Your dog agrees.
Yeah, he heard the neighbor dogs out there.
No, he definitely agrees.
So yeah.
See, and kind of going back to the whole Anubis thing and the Egyptians, is what I find fascinating is with the hieroglyphs. You've got all different beings that they have. They've got hawk heads and jackal heads, and back then they worshipped them as their gods. So there was something that they saw back then. And it's kind of hard to believe that something like that still doesn't exist today. There could be something out there, and there's definitely enough sightings to go off of.
Well, they had to all get the idea somewhere.
Right, yeah, you don't just think that out of thin air.
No, and I mean, all cultures have their origin of man stories that usually involve one small group of people surviving. You know, with the Bible, we have everybody who was from Noah's family surviving and going out, and then our present science tells us that humanity all of us alive today were descended from a very small group of people.
Right.
That came out of Africa at a certain time.
Well, and even after that, they say about 14,000 years ago that a cataclysmic event happened that all life on Earth was dropped back down to 33,000. And, now we're talking like the time of Machu Picchu. And that's not really touched on either. So we know that great extinctions have happened. They've been written about, and, the time frames are all over the place. But the one thing that has been consistent are these stories from around the world of the same lights in the sky, the same, and yes, I know the dog man is not the same as Anubis, but these things are they're similar enough between
but they're common,
separated by oceans. Right.
They're common stories of origin that show everything is coming from a small group of people that, of course, would have the same stories, and knowledge, and pass it on that way. So yeah, you can see why we might have these similarities. That's the kind of thing, a man with a dog's head. That's the kind of thing you don't forget. That's the story that gets repeated over eons.
Absolutely.
Well, and some of these beings would know that at the time as well. Now, one thing I kind of want to touch on before we close out here is the link from all of everything we've talked about tonight, and it seems like we've kind of grazed on everything, but is the link between all of this and UFOs. Because it does seem that where a lot of the hot spots of these creatures there also seems to be a high percentage of UFO sightings, strange disappearances, and other things. Do you think these lights are a result of these creatures, or do you think that these are just like portals or gateways where just many things are overlapping at the same time? Because, it would seem very hard to believe that Bigfoot exists as a normal creature, the Dogman exists as a normal creature, aliens come from another planet, ghosts, for all of these things to just be happening, they must be linked to some way. Do you think these hotspots work as portals or gateways, and that?
Well, they seem to. I keep going back to John Keel, the great, the late great Fortean investigator who spent years investigating Mothman in Virginia. If you remember the great winged creature that seemed to foretell the collapse of the Silver Bridge. Almost like a doom shower sort of thing. But what he said most people overlooked was that while he was there, he was spending most of his time investigating UFO sightings.
Yep.
And Men in Black, he said there were hundreds of UFO reports from up and down that River Valley, where everything happened, and at the same time that these sightings of the Mothman were going on. So they do seem related there. In my Monsters Among Us book, one thing that I did with the major stories that seem to have good enough dates to check up, I made a little chart at the end of each story saying what I found in terms of correlations between phases of the moon, solar flares, UFOs nearby, and it was you can't have any sort of a definitive answer from the small number of samples in one book, but I did seem to find that more often than I thought, I was able to, take the date of a sighting, and then even if the witnesses hadn't reported anything, go to the MUFON and the New Fork files and find something within very close range, within a very close time frame in many cases. I also found that there was little or no relationship to full moons. Three-quarter moons were more plentiful during the Dogman sightings, and that solar flares seem to have more influence than the moon phase. So I think there's a lot we can do studying sort of empiric facts of the weather and other meteorology and things around these sightings that we can then maybe draw and infer from.
No, and I absolutely agree with that, and I think that's why I really enjoy your work, because because of your journalistic background, you seem to approach it with kind of more of a investigative scientific approach because, obviously if you look at the information, something is going on. You don't have to be the ignorant, like religious scientist, I guess I call them, where they think that science, a textbook of biology or physics or chemistry, is the law of the land. If you step outside of that, you can notice patterns with this phenomena. There's plenty of science to study and to research, and maybe not any one person can put it all together, but working together, maybe we can create a map and kind of figure out what's going on here. So.
Yes, exactly. You go.
Well,
you go, guy.
I definitely appreciate having you on the show tonight. Now, where can our listeners find Monsters Among Us? Is that going to be on Amazon? Is that going to be on your personal website as well?
I have a list of my books on lindagodfrey.com, but you can find Monsters Among Us either from the publisher, which is Penguin Random House, or for Amazon, Barnes & Noble, just about any online book retailer will have that. So it's pretty easy to find.
Yeah, it's a great book. I really recommend it for anyone who's interested in it.
Well,
Thank you.
From Pat to me, we appreciate you being on the show, Linda, and I hope you have a wonderful night.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.
Look forward to working with you in the future.
I certainly hope so.
We'll see you soon.
Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
All right, and thank you guys for tuning into Shifting Paradigms. Like I said, we'll be bringing you an extra show this month of May. This has been Chris.
And this is Pat.
You can check us out on the web at our Shifting Paradigms Media Facebook page. Sorry about that. Otherwise, you can contact us at our email at shiftingparadigmsmedia@gmail.com. You guys have a wonderful night, and we'll catch you later this month.
Thanks for listening.